Roman historiography is indebted to the Greeks, who invented the form. The Romans had great models to base the works upon, such as Herodotus and Thucydides. Roman historiographical forms are different from the Greek ones, however, and voice very Roman concerns. Unlike the Greeks, Roman historiography did not start out with an oral historical tradition. The Roman style of history was based on the way that the annals of the Pontifex Maximus, or the Annales Maximi, were recorded. The Annales Maximi include a wide array of information, including religious documents, names of consuls, deaths of priests, and various disasters throughout history. Also part of the Annales Maximi are the White Tablets, or the Tabulae Albertae, which consist of information on the origin of the Republic. History of Roman historiography. The foundation of Roman historiography. The most well-known originator of Roman historiography was Quintus Fabius Pictor, also known as the founder of historiography. Before the Second Punic War, there was no historiography in Rome, but after, it was needed to commemorate this important occasion. Fabius Pictor took up the task and wrote a history of Rome in Greek, not Latin. This choice of writing about the war in Greek arose from a need to address the Greeks and counter another author, Timaeus, who also wrote a history of Rome until the Second Punic War. Timaeus wrote with a negative view of Rome. Therefore, in defense of the Roman state, Fabius Pictor wrote in Greek, using Olympiad dating and a Hellenistic style. Fabius Pictor's style of writing history, defending the Roman state and its actions, and using propaganda heavily, eventually became a defining characteristic of Roman historiography. Fabius Pictor is known for the establishment of the ab urbi condita tradition of historiography, which is writing history from the founding of the city. After Fabius Pictor wrote, many other authors followed his lead, inspired by the new literary form. Lucius Cincius Alimentis, Gaius Acilius, Aulus Postumius Albinus, and Cato the Elder. Cato the Elder is credited as the first historian to write in Latin. His work, The Origines, was written to teach Romans what it means to be Roman. Like Fabius Pictor, Cato the Elder wrote Ab Urbi Condita, and the early history is filled with legends illustrating Roman virtues. The Origines also spoke of how not only Rome, but the other Italian towns were venerable, and that the Romans were indeed superior to the Greeks. The Romans enjoyed serious endeavors, and so the writing of historiography became very popular for upper-class citizens who wanted to spend their time on worthwhile, virtuous Roman activities. As leisure time was looked down upon by the Romans, writing history became an acceptable way to spend retirement. Almost as soon as historiography started being used by the Romans, it split into two traditions, the Annalistic Tradition and the Monographic Tradition. The Annalistic Tradition. The authors who used the Annalistic Tradition wrote histories year by year, from the beginning, which was most frequently from the founding of the city, usually up until the time that they were living in. Some annalistic authors, Gnaeus Gellius wrote his history from Aeneas until 146 BC. Lucius Calpurnius Piso Frugi wrote trying to figure out why the Roman society had begun to decline. His history chronicled Rome from the foundation until 154 BC, when he believed that the society had hit its lowest point. Publius Mucius Scavula wrote a history from the foundation of the city in 80 books. Sempronius Aecilia wrote a history from the Punic Wars until c. 100 BC. Quintus Claudius Quadragarius wrote that all Roman wars are just, and that the Senate and all Roman dealings were honorable, in annalistic form. The monographic tradition. Monographs are more similar to the history books that we are used to today. They are usually on a single topic, but most importantly, they do not tell history from the beginning, and they are not even necessarily annalistic. An important subcategory that emerged from the monographic tradition was the biography. Some monographic authors. Gaius Gracchus wrote a biography of his brother, Tiberius Gracchus. Gaius Fannius also wrote a biography of Tiberius Gracchus, but showed him in a negative light. Lucius Caelius Antipater wrote a monograph on the Second Punic War. Sallust wrote 2 monographs, Bellum Catilini, which is about the Catilinarian conspiracy from 66-63 BC, and a Bellum Jugurthianum, which is about the war with Jugurtha which took place from 111–105 BC. Factionalized history. Often, especially in times of political unrest or social turmoil, historians rewrote history to suit the particular views of the age. So, there were many different historians, each rewriting history a little bit to bolster the case. This was especially evident in the 70s BC when the social wars were going on between the populists led by Marius and the senatorials led by Sulla. Several authors wrote histories during this time, each taking a side. Gaius Licinius Macer was anti-Sullan and wrote his history, based on Gnaeus Gellius, in 16 books, for the founding of the city until the 3rd century BC, whereas Valerius Antius, who was pro-Sulla, wrote a history in 75 books, for the founding of the city until 91 BC. Overview. The historiography we most readily identify with the Romans, coming from sources such as Caesar, Sallust, Livy, Tacitus, and other minor authors, owes much to its early roots and Greek predecessors. However, contrary to the Greek form, the Roman form included various attitudes and concerns that were considered strictly Roman. As the recording of Roman history began to evolve and take shape, many characteristics came to define what we know today as Roman historiography, most notably the strong defensive and allegiance to the Roman state and its wide variety of moral ideals, the factional nature of some histories, the splitting of historiography into 2 distinct categories, the annals and the monograph, and the rewriting of history to suit the author's needs. Characteristics. Annals are a year-by-year arrangement of historical writing. In Roman historiography, annals generally begin at the founding of Rome. Proper annals include whatever events were of importance for each year, as well as other information such as the names of that year's consuls, which was the basis by which Romans generally identified years. The annal seems originally to have been used by the priesthood to keep track of omens and portents. The Annales Maximi were a running set of annals kept by the Pontifex Maximus. The Annales Maximi contained such information as names of the magistrates of each year, public events, and omens such as eclipses and monstrous births. The Annales Maximi covers the period from the early Roman Republic to around the time of the Gracchi. Gracchus annalist seems to refer to the writers of history in annalistic form who began writing after the time of the Gracchi. Compared to other forms of annalistic history, these seem more fictionalized, as Roman historians used the histories to illustrate points about their own time, and were not necessarily out to produce hard fact. Still, Gracchus annalists have produced interesting insight into the writer's own time, if not necessarily into the time on which they wrote. Sallust and Tacitus are fair examples of Gracchus annalists. A monograph is a comprehensive work on a single subject. The monograph could be written about a single event, a technique, rhetoric, or one of any number of other subjects. For example, Pliny the Elder once published a monograph on the use of the throwing spear by cavalry. Monographs were among the most common historical works found in Roman writings. Ab urbi condita, literally, from the founding of the city, describes the Roman tradition of beginning histories at the founding of the city of Rome. For examples, see Tacitus, Livy, Sallust, al. In Livius ab urbi condita, much time is spent on the early history of Rome, and on the founding of the city itself. In Sallust's histories, the founding and early history of Rome is almost reduced to a single sentence. Thus, the ab urbi condita form is extremely variable while continuing to mold Roman histories. Senatorial history describes history written by with information from a Roman senator. Senatorial histories are generally particularly informative due to their insider's perspective. A general pattern of senatorial histories is that they seem to invariably contain a reason that the author is writing histories instead of remaining involved in politics. Sullan annalists politicized the past. They were partisans of the Sullan faction who carried on the Marius and Sulla conflict through their histories, often rewriting them to fit their own agenda. Some Sullan annalists may have been sources for Livy. Valerius Antius was a Sullan annalist, but he was not viewed as a credible historian. He seems to have been trying to counter the Marian historian, see Licinius Mesa. Antias' history, written in 76 books, is melodramatic and often filled with exaggerations and lies. In his history, anyone named Cornelius is considered a hero and anyone named Claudius is an enemy, and the opposition to the populares never went by a consistent name but were instead called boni, optime, or optimates, implying that they were the good guys. Roman historiography is also very well known for subversive writing styles. The information in the ancient Roman histories is often communicated by suggestion, innuendo, implication and insinuation because their attitudes would not always be well received. Tacitus opposed the emperors and believed that they were one of the reasons for the decline of Rome. Tacitus even wrote disparagingly of Augustus, the most celebrated and beloved of the emperors. Of course, these opinions had to be veiled since they would not have gone over very well. In Roman historiography, commentary is simply a raw account of events often not intended for publication. It was not considered traditional history because it lacked the necessary speeches and literary flourishes. Commentary was usually turned into history later on. Many think Caesar's account of the Gallic Wars, commentary rerum gestorum, was called commentary for propagandistic purposes. They believe that it is actually history, since it is so well written, pro-Roman, and fits the traditional patterns of historiography. Ancient Roman historians did not write for the sake of writing, they wrote in an effort to convince their audiences. Propaganda is ever present and is the function of Roman historiography. Ancient Roman historians traditionally had personal and political baggage and were not disinterested observers. Their accounts were written with the specific moral and political agendas. For example, Fabius Pictor started the tradition of historiography that was concerned with both morality and history and affirmed the prestige of Roman state and its people. Ancient Roman historians wrote pragmatic histories in order to benefit future statesmen. The philosophy of pragmatic history treats historical happenings with special reference to causes, conditions and results. In Roman historiography, the facts and an impression of what the facts mean are presented. Interpretation is always a part of historiography. Romans never made any pretense about it. Conflict between the facts and the interpretation of those facts indicate a good historian. Polybius, who wrote in Greek, was the first pragmatic historian. His histories have an aristocratic ethos and reveal his opinions on honor, wealth and war. Tacitus was also a pragmatic. His histories have literary merit and interpretations of facts and events. He was not purely objective, rather his judgments served a moral function.